So I'm glad to be back tonight, and it's a privilege and an honor to be with the church and be able to talk to you tonight and also on Sunday. But I'd like my wife to be able to introduce herself.
It is wonderful to be here with you. Scott came back in July and was telling me about all of you and his wonderful time here. And he was like, "You're really going to love them. You're really going to enjoy them. It's a great group to be together." So I was like, okay, well, like, when are we going then? And so here we are. It's wonderful to be with you. I never know if I should bring greetings from Berlin, which is where we are now. I spend 3 months out of the year in Seattle, and so I haven't been there. So tonight you get greetings from Berlin, and it was really wonderful to be able to just take that quick little flight. 2 hours, and it's like you from Berlin, you can be about anywhere in Europe or the UK. It's wonderful. So I'm very happy to be here with you.
So we've been asked to talk about spiritual relationships tonight, right? Spiritually healthy. We could do one on spiritually unhealthy relationships. Spiritually healthy relationships. So tonight, take a few notes, even if they're just mental notes, and think about how these principles might apply to you and the collection of your best friends in the fellowship here. I want you to be thinking about that tonight as we talk. How does this go for you? How does it go with your best friends? Maybe your small group, something like that. Think of a context. And then hopefully tonight, if we have enough time, Tim told me to preach on until midnight, but if we have, he didn't say that you'd be here, but he said preach on until midnight. If we have enough time, maybe we can take some questions and have some discussion points about it, right? I mean, relationships is a pretty big word, pretty big topic. But we want to talk about healthy relationships because when we went to Berlin, that was a big concern. So when we arrived there a year ago after doing coaching for a number of years, I think the church there was doing a lot of this work around what does it mean to have so-called discipleship in our church and discipling relationships and healthy interactions versus unhealthy interactions. A lot of questions about that. And everywhere I go in our family of churches, people do have questions about it. It's a good question to ask. Words like relationship, that's a big word. A word like discipleship, that's a big word. What do we really mean by that is important for us to clarify. If you have time sometime, you can go check out my cheesy Vimeos online at vimeo.com. I think my handle is Greenland1, or maybe just Greenland. And I've done some Vimeos on discipling that I think you would find really interesting, at least something to get a little bit of discussion going. And that's kind of my hope tonight, is that we're going to throw out some principles that we've had to talk to the Berlin church about that at least just gets us talking about it, right? We're never going to figure everything out in one night. We're never going to hear one sermon that goes, that's it, no more sermons are needed, we're done, we're ready for heaven. It's not going to ever work that way. We want to have messages that hopefully just get us thinking and talking. That's how we're going to keep growing, right? So I'm going to start off with a scriptural reference. I'm going to tell you, don't read the Bible. Wait a minute. Did I say that out loud? Don't read this right now. Read it at home because it's a long read. And that's the book of Numbers in chapter 13, about midway through the chapter. But I want to paraphrase that for you. The Israelites that had escaped from Egypt under Moses' leadership that God had developed. Moses and God had this best friend relationship, and he was leading the people, and they'd been through fire and water, through a lot of trouble, a lot of instruction, some amazing miracles. And they finally got to the place they were supposed to go. They came to the precipice of the promised land. And God told Moses, I want you to send 12 spies into that land to find out what it's like. Such an interesting request from God, who himself already knew exactly what it was like. And had already promised that it would be theirs. So we might infer from that there was a kind of test going on, or at least a context for God to reveal where's your faith at. Because he said, I want you to go in there and see what it's like. Are the people big? Are they strong? Are there fortifications or not? Is the land fruitful or not? One of the more interesting questions he said is, are there trees on the land or not? I've always thought that was an interesting spy question. Go in there and see if there's trees. If you go to the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, where we're from, you'll see a lot of trees. So I don't know how many trees were in the land of Canaan at that time, but God said, find out about the trees too. So the 12 spies go in there, including Joshua and Caleb. We know this story. They come back, and it says they were there for 40 days. 40 days of spying and of finding out if there were trees on the land. And they took some of the fruit, and they put it on. Some of the grapes were so gigantic from the valley of Esher that they put it on the pole and bring the grapes back. And They came back and they basically reported back to Moses and the people and said, the land is great, and it really does flow with milk and honey, and here's part of the crop, and here's the fruit from the land. So they begin their report a little bit positively, but then as they delve further into the report, they say, however, the cities are strong and large and heavily fortified. The people there are big and strong. They've got these weapons that we don't have. And they looked at it. It seemed to us that in their eyes we were grasshoppers. They looked at us like we were bugs. And we felt the same ourselves. I don't know what the 10 spies were saying about this. I don't know what they were feeling. I don't know if they were saying, this is a time to get vulnerable. This is a time to get open. And we're really scared about going into this promised land. We're just being vulnerable. We're just being open. I don't know if that was their mentality. But of course, Caleb silenced the crowd, the Bible says, and he said, we should definitely go up into the land because we can definitely do it with God. But the report of the 10 persuaded the crowd against the 2 and against Moses, and there was a rebellion. The consequence of which was that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. For a 40-day report. They wound up spending 40 years in the desert until this generation died off. And we see, of course, in the book of Joshua that they reapproached the promised land 40 years later, where Joshua then sends 2 spies a second time into the land. Interesting to me. Maybe he felt like 2 was better luck. Me and Caleb last time came out positive. Let's send 2 this time, and hopefully they'll come back. I don't know. But they came, and the thing that I want us to see about this, I think if there's any passage in the Bible that to me frames, for me, the most basic choice of my life, it's this one, which is, am I going to live my life like the 10 or like the 2? Am I going to be a person who's a naysayer or a faith sayer? Am I going to be a person who sees what's good in the land, or I'm going to see all the obstacles in the land? And the way that I put this to the church in Berlin, this was a year ago, this was our theme for the year, was that are we going to be a faith-based church? Are we going to be faith-based thinkers, or are we going to be fear-based thinkers? Or put another way, are we going to be flaw-based thinkers? And when I frame the question that way, I would say that most of us get this, understand this pretty well about circumstances. Just like this promised land piece, we would look at a circumstance and say, well, you know, I got cancer this year, it's really tough. Am I going to be a faith-based person or a fear-based person? We can understand it about circumstance at times. But I wonder, when we look in the mirror and we see ourselves spiritually, whether we get this. That is, how do we judge ourselves? When I look in the mirror and I ask myself, what do I think about Scott Green in the year 2015? Am I a faith-based thinker? Or am I a flaw-based thinker? Is the glass basically half empty, or is the glass half full? And furthermore, when we look at one another in relationship around this room tonight, and we see each other, are we basically faith-based with the spectacles that we have on? I see you through spectacles of faith. Or do I see you through the spectacles of flaw and see you through the spectacles of fear? To me, this is the most basic question that we have about relationship building. It's fundamental to the New Testament that we see how God looks at us this way. And there's a scripture in Romans chapter 4 that's one of my favorites. Take a look there. We will read this one. Romans 4, excuse me, and beginning in verse 16. You know, if God were in the flesh here, I guess that would be Jesus Redux. If Jesus were here leading this church physically, like he did the 12 for 3 years, would he be faith-based in his regard for you, or flaw-based? I think we know the answer to that, but the Bible puts it this way, Romans 4:16. Therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. Not only those who are of the law, but also those who have the faith of Abraham. He's the father of us all. Verse 17. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not. Well, I think back when we arrived in Berlin a year ago, This idea that God sees us as we can be, or God sees what we don't even see in ourselves by grace and by faith. That was something kind of missing fundamentally from the Berlin church. Not entirely, I don't want to overstate it, but there were some big holes in our spiritual wall there of fear-based thinking and flaw-based thinking about ourselves and about one another. Some of that was even in our theology, because when you think of Reformation theology emanating from around Berlin, Wittenberg, where Luther was and officially started the Reformation now almost 500 years ago, the Lutheran, the Catholic priest who founded sort of this Lutheran piece of the Reformation, these reformers, when you read their writings, and I'm not judging them, but what they came out of is pretty remarkable. But even they could sometimes be pretty, could be pretty flaw-based in their thinking. When you read the works of John Calvin, and you start thinking about what later became Presbyterianism in Scotland, and just kind of I don't mean to overstate this, okay? But kind of what I read is the negativity of John Knox and some of these reformers. I don't know how long I could have made it in that fellowship. I might have been chased me back into the Catholic Church. I don't know. But just in Reformation theology, even just this picking at, we're missing this and we're missing that, and we're not doing this and we're not doing that. And the way that I'm reading the New Testament, maybe I'm reading what I want to believe. I don't think so. I'm seeing a God that sees always what can be and sees the best in us and sees what he hopes for, and he sees those dreams for us. He's relentless about this. He's a faith-based thinker, and he introduces us into faith and illustrates it here in this passage. So what does that mean then about our relationships? If we're going to have healthy spiritual relationships and we're faith-based about each other, what does that mean? Does that mean that we just put up with each other's sin? Do we just put up with each other's flaws? What if I'm struggling with genuine lukewarmness in my life? Do you just look at me and go, yeah, but you're the greatest guy there ever was, Scott? Don't worry about being lukewarm. Jesus might spit you out of his mouth, but I won't. What do we do with each other when there's problems, right? When things do come to our attention? This is something that we should talk a little bit about tonight.
I actually really love talking about relationships, but I love even more experiencing the great relationships that we have in the kingdom. Now, I know that all of us have also had some bad relationships, but that was going to be true wherever we were in life. Yeah. There were going to be some good ones and there were going to be some bad ones. And at least in the kingdom, in God's kingdom, within the parameters of what he's taught us within the Word, we have the means and the know-how to repair relationships, how to have good relationships. And so in all of this, as we're trying to figure out what are healthy, mature relationships, a lot of it for me goes back to some very basic principles that the Bible teaches that we must have one another relationships. And that was the thing that drew me to the church to begin with, is I saw this real love for one another. And I look out at this group tonight and I go, this group is as diverse and different as everywhere in the kingdom that I go. And that's the beauty of what we are, is that we get to practice with one another and really learn how to love one another. And I don't think it comes easily. I don't know about you, but I was not naturally good at relationships. I was actually a natural loner. I was actually really good at building walls and keeping people at a distance and not trusting. And yet through the Bible, I learned how to trust and how to love. And then, as many of you have had too, there were some good relationships and some bad. And now what are we going to do with that? Have no? And I've seen a lot of people go, I can't trust again. And I don't accept that, because that's not what the Bible says. The Bible still says it's the one another way. That we must have one another relationships. So whatever you call it, you can call it discipling, you can call it mentoring, you can call it peer. I don't really care what it's called as long as it looks like what it was in the Bible. Yes. Yeah. The one another way that we practice those things. And I've seen sort of this pendulum swing to where relationships were very directed, to where now there are some people that have like no relationships. Yeah. And the other night I was actually in a women's meeting. It was the Frauenrat, and Rat in German means council, like the leader. So it was really just the women leaders all getting together, and we were talking about what the needs were. And one of the sisters just kept saying, we just need to encourage everyone. And how can you argue with that?
Right. How do you say no?
I mean, that's true, right? Everyone needs encouragement. But there was something about it that I was going, wait, there's something missing. And then the scripture that popped into my mind, and is one that I really try to apply, is 1 Thessalonians 5:14, where it says, encourage the timid, help the weak, warn the idle, be patient with everyone.
Amen.
And I thought, okay, it's not just encourage, although that scripture says encourage the timid. Some people need encouragement, some people need help. Some of us, and maybe I put myself in that category, I probably do better with a little bit of a warning from time to time. I respond well to that. I kind of go, okay, yeah, I need a warning. But the point is, there's not one thing that meets all of our needs.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's this, discernment. To really, that's a good spiritual word, isn't it? To pray for discernment about what my friends need. How can I be someone that gives them what they need, or anyone, whether it's just someone who comes up in the fellowship, to have a sense of discernment about what they need. I think it used to be that, did you ever feel like you needed to have an answer for everything?
Yeah.
I mean, I did. I thought if somebody asked me a question, I need to know the answer. Now I don't feel that way. I go, well, let's think about that. What do you think? What do you want to do? And some of this has been informed by Scott's study in marriage and family therapy. We both actually, in our 50s, decided to go back and get master's degrees. Why? Now, sometimes I wonder, but we actually both love learning. And so he started first and finished first. And so his is in marriage and family therapy. And I watched his degree work with what we did. And so I continued my studies, but switched it from linguistics to communication because I wanted to work with something that enhanced what we do together. And in part of his study, they used the acronym, that's the right word, O.R.C.A. And it works in Seattle because they're the orca whales, you know, you can remember it. And so they used this, and we've adopted those principles because they really apply well when you're working with relationships. So the O for O.R.C.A stands for openness. And to truly have a spirit of openness when someone comes to me with a problem, or a question, or an issue, or a thought, to have a sense of openness about what this could be. I'll give you an example. Now, I actually tend to be a fairly decisive person, and I like to draw conclusions. Can get me in big trouble. But the other day, Scott and I were walking down the street, and he had his jacket on, and the hood was inside out. Normally, I would say, you look kind of doofusy, dude. Let me fix your hood. But I thought, you know what? I walked up to him and I said, is there a reason why your hood is that way? He said, what? And I said, well, I thought maybe you had turned it inside out so that the rain wouldn't get caught in the hood. He said, no, I just wasn't thinking about it. I said, okay, let me fix your hood. But that was an example of openness. I actually thought he had a reason why he did that. That worked for him in some way. There was a grand plan. I was open to the possibilities rather than closing it down. And I think too often we close things down rather than keep an openness of spirit about whatever the issue may be.
Can I throw out another quick example of that? I think openness too is just a simple idea that there's more than one way to do something. Right? So someone says, well, I want to be a bolder Christian. There's a lot of ways to be bold. There's not one way to be bold. Now you're bold, you're not bold, you are. It's fluid and you have to work with it. It's being open that there's more than one way to do something or define something.
And I think starting any relationship or conversation with this attitude is really helpful. It allows for a lot to happen within that space. The second part of O.R.C.A is respect. And I think this is something that each of us can kind of examine our soul about how we are towards others. Are we fundamentally respectful or fundamentally disrespectful? And it's something that I really look at my own heart about. I think it's so easy for me to be judgmental. And judgmental is the opposite of respectful. And I think that there's been a lot of judgment in the kingdom. I think that there used to be sort of a judgment about how things should be. And then there's been a reverse about that. And I just think there needs to be, for me, it's really been helpful to have a spirit of respect for other people. And even though we may not agree on everything, there's a reason why they do what they do. There's a reason why they think how they think. And I really want to understand that. And I think respect allows me to find that space to understand. And this is something that Scott and I have had to engage in a lot when we've lived in multiple cultures. Yeah. So living in Hong Kong, I had to be respectful of that culture, even though I didn't understand it at times. And I sought to understand it. Moving to the Northwest in America, the Northwest is a different place in America. And it was new to me, and I wanted to be respectful of what's there. Now in Germany, it's the same thing, that there's space to respect how other people choose to interact with things.
That's awesome. Excuse me. Being respectful too. You know, there's a lot of things in it, right? It could be a tone in my voice. It could be a choice of words that's unintentional. It could be a presumption of a certain kind of relationship. If I'm constantly advising you and you're not really in for that, you don't mind some advice. But if our relationship is I'm constantly advising you or trying to direct you like some sort of diving coach or something, it may start to feel unrespectful or disrespectful, right? So there's a lot of ways to look at that. And I think sometimes if we have felt disrespected, we may just check out our relationships entirely, keep our distance, and settle for less. Instead of just giving voice to it and saying, I know in my life I haven't felt respected much. I've often felt, overcorrected, overdirected, or whatever. I've got to talk about that. Is it safe for me to talk with you about that? And for us to pursue a friendship where we can help each other. And you're kind of getting the respect into the room rather than kind of having it buried somewhere in your soul. The C for O.R.C.A. One whale of an acronym. Okay, O.R.C.A. The C, curiosity, which really helps destroy, I think, the disrespectful piece. If I keep my curiosity, as a therapist, I must. People are coming to me with stuff, and they're paying me for my time on my day off, and they've got sometimes some very deep, entrenched problems that they're trying to work on over a succession of weeks. And for me to presume certain answers very quickly, well, have you looked at, Matthew 16:16? Well, have you looked at Proverbs 26:3? And just kaboom, throwing these things at people. I find it doesn't help. I find it doesn't help any more than you go to see a doctor with a complex problem. They go, here, take 2 aspirin, this pill, and then don't waste any more of my time, and I'll see you in about a month, see how it goes. It doesn't feel right because there's more there than that. And so the curiosity piece as a therapist, and I'm learning to apply this as a minister and as a Christian, is just I want to understand. I really want to understand what's going on for you. I believe by faith that your experience will probably be a little different from mine, at least. Maybe wholly different, but at least a little different with the things that you come with. And so therefore I'm really curious about, I want to know what it's like to be in your shoes and to wear this problem and to have it cause some suffering, and I want to know more about it. And that my desire to understand in that moment was really helpful for me to kind of stop having to be the fixer, because I find I can't do both of those things at the same time. If I'm in fix-it mode, if you insist, I have this problem, fix it, I find it very hard to be curious. And conversely, if I am in a curious place and exercising curiosity, fixing doesn't really come into my head, and I can really just try to understand your situation well. So think about that C. That's probably the most important part to me is in O.R.C.A. is the curiosity. I think scripturally, you just look through at the 4 Gospels at how Jesus often exercised that around people. What's his name? What's his problem? How long has he been this way? There's a curiosity that Christ had. He didn't have to ask any questions. He didn't have to. He knew everything, right? Guy can turn water into wine and raise Lazarus from the dead. Doesn't need to be asking questions about how long has he been this way. It's a stance. It's a way of being, and Jesus showed us that many, many times. The A for O.R.C.A. Awareness of power. This is more for those of you that are older in Christ, or you've been in a position of responsibility or leadership that is conspicuous. Or it could be that you've just been a Christian longer than the person who just got baptized, and they're coming to you with, I want to know how to do everything to become the Apostle Paul, you know. And you're like, well, first of all, you're a sister, not a brother. Apostle Paul's probably not the best model. But they're coming to you, and suddenly you're in this place of power that you maybe didn't even ask for. And the A just means being aware of it, being aware of power. What if I give this person 6 answers and they actually go do all 6? What sort of liability does that put on my shoulders if life doesn't go so good when they did all 6, you know? That's something for us to consider. And I don't mean that we're trying to play chicken or anything. It's just that when we're talking to each other, we should be aware of that. Well, what if they actually did everything I said to do? Good grief. Would that be good? Would that really help? Or would that mess it up? And now it's my fault. Now they come to me 2 months later and say, well, I did everything you told me and it destroyed my life. Let me be curious now, you know. How did I ruin your life? No. So be aware of power, right? Be aware of the power you might have that you don't even know you have. Okay. Sorry about my cough tonight. I thought I had dealt with that. All right, homework. Before we have 2 main points tonight. This is the end of point 1. Homework. What to do about this? On your own. Think about everything we talked about with this and do something with it. But more specifically, in Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 22, go over the fruits of the Spirit sometime this week. And be faith-based as you think about where you want to go spiritually. Where do you want to grow in 2015? How do you want to become more like Christ? What ways of being would you like to have that weren't true for you a year ago? Look at that list that's the fruits of the Spirit and ask, what would I like to adopt into my life? And have a conversation with yourself about that and be faith-based, not flaw-based, right? And then secondly, talk about that with someone you love, someone who's a great friend, someone who's close to you, and share those with each other. And I think you'll be surprised at how much strength it lends to you to be faith-based, not flaw-based. Amen? Okay, the second point. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians 2.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Cough sweet.
I've got some water and now a tissue,
Oh, okay.
which I hope will remedy, but thank you. I'm allergic to Thames Valley. That ain't right. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. This is such an interesting passage to me. And we're going to look in look down in verse 12. Okay. Sometime it'd be fun on your own. We don't have time for this tonight, but start tracing through the book of 2 Corinthians in chapter 1 all the way through chapter 7. And look at this sub-story going on about Paul and Titus. It's a fascinating, he's talking about all this stuff and you lose track of it. But he talks about Titus at different intervals in different ways that was on his mind about his relationship with Titus. So it keeps re-emerging in the text. And one of the things he says here in chapter 2, verse 12, when I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ and found that the Lord had opened a door for me, I still had no peace of mind, because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went on to Macedonia. If you're like me and you're one of those people that's been praying for open doors for a long time in your life, where you live, your neighborhood, your community, your campus, your favorite teen that you wish would be open to becoming a Christian, and you pray and you pray and you pray for open doors, and it seems like they don't come for a long time, this is hard to understand. Paul finally comes upon, there's this wide open door, but I was missing my brother Titus, and so I said goodbye. I don't know if I can say I've ever done that for the sake of a relationship. Maybe I have, and I just haven't remembered it. But I want us to think about this second topic tonight about relationships, and that would be, does brotherhood describe what you're building? Does brotherhood describe what you're building? Because we have a fundamental choice to make about relationships and open doors. it's not unlike business people that are kind of holding in one hand their wife and their kids, and then there's this business opportunity in the other hand. And they're having this terrible choice to make. I think we in the church have a terrible choice to make when these things come to us, which is God opens certain doors, but then we've got this relationship piece over here. And this is something we got to think about for the rest of our lives, about what's the most important between those two, because that's the juxtaposition here that Paul's creating in this passage for us to think very carefully about.
As Scott and I, we like to talk a lot about the ministry. We like what we do. We like staying up late at night and just thinking and talking. And we talk about that the church is going somewhere. It's like a horse pulling a cart. And the question is, what's the horse and what's the cart? And of course, I think in the UK, you understand that analogy because there are lots of horses and carts still around here. Today we went in a pub and there was, the collar that goes on whoever's pulling it and all the harness. And I'm like, there, that goes on the horse. And we couldn't find where the cart was. But in the church, relationships are one thing and the growth of the church is another. One is the horse and one is the cart. And if you believe that relationships are the horse, it really works in my mind to go, the bigger and stronger the horse, the bigger the cart it can pull. If you got a little bitty pony, if you don't have very good relationships and you have a little Shetland pony trying to pull a cart, it's not going to go anywhere. But if you have a big, strong team of draft horses pulling something, that's moving, that's going somewhere. And they're all in harness together, working together. And I think that we've got to see our relationships really as being the primary driving force of what helps the church grow. And it's like we think those two things are, it's relationships or growth. No, it's the horse and the cart working together. And when we get inspired by that, to me, it's not work to go get with a sister. That's fun. That's the joy. That's what feeds me and feeds and keeps all of us going. And this was the thing that when we talk about our favorite times in life, it's when our relationships were really right. It's when we were in a Bible talk or a family group or a rose by whatever name you want to call it, when it was going well. Those relationships were right. We were partners. We were really deep. And it doesn't mean that there aren't problems. There are always going to be problems. There's always going to be sin. And usually in a relationship, I'm the one who sins first. I'll own it. I'll own it any day of the week. All my friends that know me go, yes, forgiveness is real because we have to forgive Lynne. She is bound to sin against us in some way. And I just go, you know what? That's the Bible, right? Forgiveness is real. And so I think we get this, I have to be perfect in a relationship before someone's going to love me. Well, then that's not real love because you're not ever going to be perfect. I'm not ever going to be perfect. But this having that in place to us is what really allows the church to move forward. And we look back, when I first started going to church in North Carolina, it was relationships that even now, like Scott and I go back, gosh. Way back to then. But we had this tight group there. And all those people are around the world and we're all still really close. That's really magic to have relationships that go from North Carolina to Boston, then to Hong Kong, and people can see it. My mother has watched our relationships for, gosh, I've been a Christian 35 years. And she still talks about each person in places, and she'll say, whatever happened to so-and-so? Where are they now? Because she knew and can still see that it's the relationships that really make us different.
I remember one time we went to China with Lynne's dad, because he's a real, he's an agnostic, but he's a real anthropologist. going to say a skull digger, but that doesn't sound right. And he just loves going all around the world, these crazy places. And he went with us to China once, and we brought some of the disciples that are close friends of ours from the church on the trip. And I can't remember how many weeks it lasted, but I remember him saying that on the plane. He said, I don't have any explanation for how you guys are together. He said, I don't understand how you've done that, but I know it's right. I know that's how people should be. And of course, he's seeing the love of Christ in the illustration of John 13:34, that when you love one another, people are going to know that we are Jesus' disciples. And I agree that when we were in that, some people you do know from that old North Carolina group besides us were Douglas Arthur and Doug Jacoby. And I remember going to those devos on Friday night thinking, first of all, it was Christians only, which was interesting. And that's what made some of this brotherhood possible. But I remember thinking, ironically, man, if I bring any of my friends from the university to one of these devos, they're going to be begging to become a Christian in 24 hours. They'll never be the same when they see what we have here. And I still feel that way today, if we're really building brotherhood. And that's kind of our question to you tonight, not just the O.R.C.A pieces or the faith-based pieces, but brotherhood. I may have shared this story with you before, but you probably forgot it, so. There was a TED Talk that I really loved not too long ago by a guy named Sebastian Junger. Nice Deutsch Nachname. And he's an American journalist who was embedded with troops in Iraq and Afghanistan for many years. He's written several books about American combat. And he did a talk not too long ago called Why Soldiers Go Back to War. You can find it on the internet. And he was raising this question about why soldiers want to go back to battle. He was at a party with a friend of his in Washington, D.C., who was a veteran, and a woman journalist asked his friend, you know, do you miss being in the war? And he said, ma'am, I miss almost everything about it. Almost everything about it. And so as Sebastian was talking to him about it later, you know, he thought, what did he miss? He didn't miss getting shot at, which is very dangerous. He didn't miss shooting other people. It's not the thrill of it. What did he miss that he couldn't find outside the war? And the answer was brotherhood. Something he could not find back in the USA in some other context. Brotherhood. And what people will do for brotherhood, people will go to hell for brotherhood if they have to. I've wondered why some people in my life fell away from the church and away from God. They think they found a better brotherhood sometimes. People will even risk that for brotherhood. They will. People will risk warfare for brotherhood. People will join gangs or jihad for brotherhood. And I just don't know that many people in my lifetime who have become Christians just because it's true. Now, I believe it's true. I did a lot of work on apologetics when I was a college student to ask myself, do I really believe this? Why do I believe it? I was reading C.S. Lewis backwards and, you know, just everything I could to be sure about my faith. So truth matters to me, but I don't know many people who become Christians just because it's true. It's because it genuinely from the heart feels true when Christ's love is manifested in brotherhood and sisterhood. This was the promise of Christ in John 13. And so I think about the places where I've lived. I think of my Boston years in knowing Douglas Arthur and Russ Ewell and Frank Kim and Guillermo Adame and Tom Lombardi. I think of my Boston University ministry with Steve Chen, who's now in Hong Kong, and Steve Schaff, who's still in Boston, Damien Jean-Baptiste, who passed away last year and went on to his reward. He'd worked in the ministry in the Caribbean for years. Brett Miller, Rob Urbani, whose son, Colin Urbani, is now in the campus ministry in Berlin, which is kind of cool. I think of my relationships in Seattle that way, the ones in Hong Kong, and now the ones in Berlin. We're building what I call Bob there. A band of brothers. And so that's what we're doing. Our task is to build Bob.
We were trying to figure out what would be good for sisters. Band of brothers, okay. So we came up with Circle of Sisters. So I don't know, that works for me. And when I think about when I've needed my sisters the most, one time comes to mind, and I actually really work. I need relationships. I build very deeply. I don't build very quickly. I don't know how to be best friends right away. I'm a little, I don't know, I've got to work at a relationship. I've got to figure it out. And there was a time in Seattle where we had been in one ministry for a while, and then another ministry, and then back filling the gap. And I actually said to Scott, I'm lonely. I've lost my motivation. I don't have friends. I'm feeling lonely. And I was kind of down. And Scott was like, whoa, 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 okay. Let's fix this problem. And he said, who are your friends regardless of where they are? Because I was thinking I needed to be friends with this, person here or whatever. He said, who are your friends? And I named 5 sisters. 2 were in one region and 3 were in another. And I said, these are my people that are friends. He said, just work on those friendships. And this was in September. And so I'm like, okay. So I started really just kind of being free to be friends with who I needed and wanted to be friends with. And then in December, I had to have a mammogram, and then I had to have a second mammogram. And only one of these 5 people that I had mentioned knew that I was going in for a follow-up mammogram. Well, during the course of this afternoon at the doctor, I walked out at 4 hours later understanding that I had breast cancer. And I walked out, and I was just, you're sort of at this, wow, I didn't expect that. And I remember walking out, and I thought, okay, God, where are you in all of this? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't know where you are. And I turned on my phone, and I had a message from all 5 of those sisters. Only one knew I was at the doctor. And I got these 5 messages, and I was like, okay, that's where God is. And that's how I'm going to get through this, is with these sisters that were my friends. And they did get me through what was a very, very challenging time physically and therefore spiritually. And these times come and go. And I think that we don't always expect hard times as Christians.
True.
We kind of think, I'm a Christian, it's going to be easy. Well, I'm a Christian doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It just means you're a Christian. And that we get to learn how to go through those. And for us in the past year, moving to Berlin has been another time where I've left a lot of good relationships. Now I'm having to build new relationships all over again. And that's hard work. When you got to decide to be open and vulnerable. You have to decide to give again. And it's like we know what we should do, but getting it out there, it's just a lot of work. And so I was in Seattle in November, and I had to have more surgery. And then we had to pack our house. And there was and then Scott came home sick. That was kind of the third thing, is that I really needed him, and he was sick. And so I was kind of having a bit of a down time. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And so I wrote an email just asking for prayers to my friends. I just said, here's where I'm at, friends around the world. And the responses I got back were so awesome. Some of my deeply spiritual friends sent prayers and sent scriptures and gave me quiet times. It was awesome. Some of my deeply spiritual friends sent me funny videos. Some of my deeply spiritual friends sent me funny pictures. Some just said, you'll be fine. I mean, it was just interesting that I got what I needed from all of them. But there was this sense of I'm not alone. I'm not with all of them physically, but I'm not alone. And then this week, I got an email from one of these friends who her response to me was, we're really just the same. I knew you when you were in Hong Kong, you were just the brunette version of me. And we're in this together. So she sent me that. And then this week she says, I think my turn of asking for prayers has come. I felt terribly down in the past week after having a fever for 3 days. Physical sickness is probably affecting the mind. All of a sudden, I felt like I have no friends, I'm of no use, and I'm been a burden. Remember me in your prayers. Pray my soul to be still, and pray to have strength in his words. My response, argh! We are nuts, but at least we're nuts together. Besides having a room next to each other in heaven, we will one day share, maybe, a room together in the loony bin. I will pray for you. I remain grateful we are in this together. We never knew it would be this hard, did we? And she said, having a nutty friend feels not so lonely. And you're right, we didn't know it would be this hard. the truth is we're in it together. And sometimes it's harder than we thought, but at least we have each other. And I pray that that's what you have here, that that's what will help you grow and then others.
I'll end this, and then we can have either some reflections, some questions, whatever, but I'll just end with this idea that I love open doors. I want Berlin to be an open door. I pray for and believe the church there will be 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 disciples someday. I believe there will be this massive testament of lives changed, of disciples in Berlin. I totally believe it. I think it's going to happen all over Germany. I think this group here will grow like that in the days to come. I really do. I pray for it, and I believe it. So I love open doors. I love the idea of the church, of all these open doors of seekers and us moving into different ways to serve and changing the world. I love all that, but that's not what I'm in it for. I'm in it for Bob. I'm in it for the band of brothers. I'm in it for that because someday in heaven that's all there is. Wow. We're going to be with God. Looks like we're going to be on our knees a lot, worshiping and stuff. That'll be cool. But there's going to be no more tears, no more crying, no more pain, no more evangelism. No more open doors like that. We better make the most of the ones we have, I suppose, because that's not what I'm seeing in heaven. In heaven, we have each other. And if you're not in it for Bob, I'm not sure what you're in it for. Good bottled water on Sunday, I'm not sure. But I hope you're in it for that. And I hope that that's what you decide to build here. Don't wait for Tim and Chevy to build it for you. Figure out how you do that with one another and in your small group and in your small teams. Something that when people see it, they go, I want in on that. That's Bob. That's what I've been waiting for all my life. Love you guys. We're going to pray for you. Pray for us in